You're listening to Law and Coder, a Hike 2 powered podcast that explores the intersection of technology and law to help you navigate the fast-changing world of legal tech.
Welcome back to the Law and Coder podcast. I'm Christina Natali, the Director of Industry Solutions at Hike 2. For anyone who has not been with us before, welcome, not welcome back. My co-host, Morgan Llewellyn. Hi, Morgan.
Hey, everyone. Nice to meet you all. My name is Morgan Llewellyn. For Law and Coder, I suppose I'm the coder half of the buddy cop duo here. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
I love the image of us as a buddy cop duo. I swear I noodled on this forever, and it's the perfect dynamic for us. Big news, our first episode is officially live on the internet. We've got so I'm excited because we might have two listeners today, like Morgan's mom and someone else. I don't know. What do you think, Morgan?
Yeah, I think we've got one great listener, and hopefully we can have two. No, I mean, we've got really good feedback on that first podcast. So, thanks to everyone who's listening. Thanks to everyone who's tuning in for the first time. And as always, thanks, Mom. Love you.
Love you, Morgan's mom. I was thinking today, since we can do maybe for our second episode a little bit less of an outline. I always love to be super prepared and do all of my research. One of the things I really love about how we communicate and talk about trends and things going on in legal tech and innovation is that one of us will just come to the other with oh, did you hear about, or do you have any thoughts on? And I just think that'll be a really cool kind of second episode for us here as we dive in to just talk about some things that are going on in maybe more current events versus broad topics, and why they matter, what's going on. And if I'm a legal audience, I might not have heard about them, or I might just not understand how it affects me. Maybe we can talk a little bit about, why don't you just start talking about something that's going on in current events, and then let's see how we can explain or better, communicate it to our legal listeners.
Yeah, so let's just dive in and talk about some current events. And, for those who are listening, a year in the future, this will kind of date us and tell you when we release the podcast. But one of the big things to come out over the past year past week is DeepSeek. And,
it feels like a year. It's been the longest week of all time.
It does. But, I think while it's topical today and it's current today, I think this is something that, has been building for a while, and something that's still going to be relevant a year from today. And so I think what's kind of fun and what's interesting here is, why is DeepSeek important? What does it mean for the AI industry as a whole? And then let's bring it back to legal. And why is DeepSeek, and not DeepSeek in particular the model, but the concept that there's more competitors coming to market, why is that important to legal? I think is a really important conversation that maybe not enough people are having.
Okay, well, last time I asked you on the fly, explain it to me like I'm a lawyer, and you thought you were in trouble, but let's start there. What's going on with DeepSeek? Explain it to me like I have no idea. 30 seconds, go. High level.
Well, I don't think I've 30 seconds, but so let's talk about what we're seeing with large language models. So, large language models, it's kind of the, workhorse of generative AI, and really what's, causing a lot of, kind of conversation disruption, whatever you want to call it. And with these large language models, DeepSeek's another kind of variant of it. Now they're getting more powerful. And I think one thing, if we rewind a couple of years ago, we had clearly best-in-class large language models, right? When OpenAI first came out, it was kind of heads and shoulders above the rest. But that performance gap has slowly been eroded, where I think, we are seeing parity among a number of different models. Where you are seeing, the performance of OpenAI in a lot of its tasks. I'm not saying in every single task, but, in a lot of tasks, you'll have parity between, say, an OpenAI and Anthropic, or, even some of the Llama models coming from, say, Meta. And so I think what we're seeing with DeepSeek is really just another entrant. And what we're seeing with some of these larger models, there just is going to be a kind of a conversion towards the performance of these models, right? There's going to be less of that gap. They're all going to what I like to call parity, right? You're going to have parity over a lot of what we're seeing. And so what's really interesting about DeepSeek, though, and I think what kind of rocked the financial markets even in the past week, is that it came from outside the US. Right. And so why was that important to the financial markets? They're saying, well, look, if we don't need, NVIDIA processors, if we don't have the data centers in the US, what does that mean for some of this nuclear AI, need for additional power, all these other things? And I think that's what really kind of started rocking the markets. It was less about another LLM, because we're going to get a lot more LLMs, right? Every cloud provider has their own, as we've expected for a while. They're going to continue to get better. But I think what really rocked the market was someone outside the US could be doing this. And what does that mean for kind of the pickaxe and shovels of the AI industry? And I think that's really what DeepSeek is people kind of reevaluating, what if it's not all done here in the US? What does that mean for the broader market? And so that's kind of what we're seeing. What do you think on that, Christina? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I guess, you said pickaxe and shovels. Once again, it's like you read my mind, but you didn't really answer the second half of the maybe deeper question, which is like, could you just explain a little bit more about like why does the model matter? I know you said it's probably moving toward parity, but like for someone who doesn't understand what that means, like what is the model as the AI engine or system or platform that they're using? Like what part of it is the model and why does it matter, or does it?
So, well, and I think that's kind of the point, right? If everything's moving to parity, it doesn't really matter. If, for 90% of your activities, if, DeepSeek is giving you a similar output as you can achieve with an OpenAI or something like this, it really doesn't matter. What the models are doing is, they're really the thing that's understanding the context of what you're feeding it and then generating that predictive outcome. So that's essentially what the model is doing. And the point is, if everything's moving to parity, perhaps it doesn't matter as much. It comes down to other things. It's going to come down to latency, which I don't think we're talking about, but latency is the amount of time it takes to deliver results. I think that's going to be a really important point. That brings in some of these smaller LLMs that people are talking about, and we can get into that and what that means for legal. But there's going to be other, factors, cost, latency, bias is another potential one, and just kind of flexibility. So
Okay.
I think what we're seeing is less about, when I talk about parity, it's less about the quality of the output, and you're going to start seeing folks differentiate more on some of these other dimensions.
Okay. You mentioned Claude and Anthropic as, some of the examples you were talking about. And I know I said, and they're words you said, I know it's, but really where I would go in the legal direction is, we talk a lot with our clients about whether, they want to pilot or get started with some super legal or industry specific tool, right? Like, do I want to try Clearbrief? Do I want to try, VLEX? Do I want to use,
Not a sponsor, by the way.
we are not, so again, we are not
Not yet.
sponsoring any specific tech, right? But thinking about even like Lexis AI, those tools that we've been told are like specific to a legal problem, a legal use case, to lawyers using them, versus kind of this, I don't want to say Wild West, but like this world where you can kind of ask anything and see where it takes you and what sources, are available for that. I wonder, and I have a lot of thoughts, I tend to think that most of our problems in the legal industry don't necessarily require a legal specific tool, but where do you see, do you think there are both advantages and pitfalls of maybe using, just a more general AI tool versus a specialized legal tech tool?
Yeah, let's talk about that. It's a good question. When we think about when we think about where to use a general model versus an industry specific, or think about a fine-tuned or a model trained for a specific purpose, right? You might hear the term fine-tune, or some of these small models, if you hear people talking about small large language models. So large language models, right, they're trained on, think of the history of time, right? Like every public document ever given is the easiest kind of way to think about it. And where these small models, where you see folks promoting these small models is the ability for them to be trained on information that might not be publicly available. Like that's really kind of, where you see folks.
So like access to that information, or
access to different information, and which then ends up changing, some of the predictive, how the words you're predicting should follow. The question, I think the open question that's out there is, to what degree, and I think this is really where it's relevant to legal. The question is, to what degree do you need a specialized model versus to what degree do you need a model that understands human language and has access to the relevant documents, the relevant context that you're looking for. And so I think that's really in legal where you need to start kind of having a difference of opinion. Are you looking at having a model, a large language model, that has access to the history of every brief you've ever written, or every brief that's ever been written, right? Can a large language model with access to that perform just as well as a specially trained model that's been trained on all of that? And so I think that's where we're starting to see kind of differing opinions, where some people are in the camp of, no, I need a specially trained model that understands things, versus, no, I can live with a large language model that has access to the latest brief or something like that, because that's really what I'm interested in understanding. I don't need a model that's been trained on the history of briefs, that type of thing.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's really interesting, because I think a lot about, when I was practicing in complex litigation, when you say access to documents, right, you think about documents that we might feed the model for context. So not even like as they're training the model, but like when I'm asking, ChatGPT to review this document and use that as the context, or I'm this user, here's my background, give it that, that understanding. I think as a lawyer, about the briefs that I wrote and the legal research I would do, you almost have a double access issue. Like, is it case law that's in the public domain, or is there some sort of paywall? Like, do I need, can it access that case law? And you think about the infamous ChatGPT lawyer who asked, ChatGPT, write me a brief, and then asked, are these citations real? And ChatGPT was like, yes, they're real. Right. And it's kind of silly and overplayed at this point, but I think is actually an important conversation to have. Like, is that because, it didn't understand the question, it was not trained properly? Or is it that it doesn't even have access to those sorts of resources? Was it a bad prompt? There's so many questions I have, but the main one is this question of access. Does ChatGPT, does an open model have access to something like, all of the case law and shepardization and keys that, Westlaw or LexisNexis or something have?
Yeah, so I think that's more about how you architect a solution and less about the LLM, right? So again, with DeepSeek, really what we're seeing is, models today are made to be replaced. Any model you're adopting today, whether it be a large language model or one of these smaller large language models, doesn't really matter. The model that you're implementing today isn't going to be it's going to be deprecated in 6 months or a year, right? Like, it should be deprecated in that amount of time, just at the speed of advancement that we're seeing. And so it's less about, the large language model for today. It's more about how are you architecting a system, and kind of what you're alluding to, it's more about how are you providing it access and restricting access to the right information. That's what's more important. It's less about the model. The model is, again, if they're going to parity, at some level, it becomes a commodity. And it's more about how do you, provide that model access, have a well-architected system. I'm not saying there aren't edge cases out there where, yes, you do want to fine-tune model, right? 100% there are. And I think, some people, will fight tooth and nail over that opinion. I'm just saying for the majority of use cases, we're seeing parity in these large language models. And so how you provide access to information is probably more important than the actual model you're using.
Okay, one last follow-up question, and then I'm ready for your next current event. To me, I've heard a lot of people use the word like training the model, right? And I know what you mean about how, the company trains the model that is in existence that we're asking questions of. But I hear a lot of people saying like the way that they build kind of that context, and they'll say like, oh, well, you have to train the model. Is that a real thing? Are they training the model, or are they just teaching it? And I guess maybe that's just semantics, but they're really just, giving the proper context and telling it to, either remember or refeeding it that context, right?
Yeah, so when people are talking about training a model, there's very few organizations out there that are actually training LLMs, right? And building LLMs from scratch. What most people are referring to and how most organizations, particularly, kind of in legal, should be thinking about it is what information do I give access to the LLM? The LLM's trained, the algorithm's trained. What it needs is the right information, right? And it also needs the right, kind of call it a prompt, right? It needs the right prompt of how to understand this information and what you want to do with it. And on that prompt side, kind of just a brief aside, it's about the consistency and reliability of the output of your LLM. And in order to get that consistency and reliability, you need to have consistency and reliability of your prompt as well. And so you don't want 100 different people doing 100 different prompts over the same piece, over the same document, because you could end up with 100 different outputs. And that would be bad from a business, from a business perspective. If I give you an input, I want to see the same output time after time.
Reliability, accuracy, we've got to know that we're going to get if we ask the same question, like you said, in the same way, and I've seen as we did POCs of some like very early, AI tools with some of our law firm clients, like that's the first thing people say is not just if they don't get the answer they expect the first time, they're immediately out, right? We're like, nope, that is not accurate. It's not reliable. I'm not ever using that again. I'm not trying again. The second thing would be maybe the first time they ask a question, they get a really good and the answer they expect. And then just kind of they're like, okay, cool, now I trust this. And I think that's another kind of the second part of it is, okay, but what about when you ask it the same thing, or when someone, you tell your paralegal, okay, this is good, this is an approved use, or your lawyers, okay, this is a use that you can use it for. And then we learn down the road that they're getting different answers, which is why.
So I think this is actually another, I don't know if this is a current event or a current topic, but I think it's a relevant topic that you're kind of touching on. And in particular, it's important for law firms. And it's this idea of testing. So we're going to be spending a lot less time building, writing code. What we're going to end up doing is spending a lot more time testing. And so all the time that we've put into development, it's not like you're going from, 100 to 10. And you're just saving, 90 hours. What you're going to end up doing when you're using, essentially statistical based, algorithms to predict, what you're going to do is spend a whole lot more time on testing and exception handling. And so it's not that you're going to go from 100 hours to 10 hours. I think there's a misnomer out there. What you're going to do is, yeah, sure, you're going to reduce your overall hours, but it's not 100 to 10. It's more like 100 to 50, because now you're going to be spending a lot more time on testing.
All right. I'm ready for your next trend, or was that it? Was that your second one?
Oh, well, that was just kind of
an offshoot.
Just a bonus. But I think that's relevant, because I do think there is this thought out there that, AI is going to say, AI is making coding easier. And so, whether it be in an implementation and a development, I'm going to save a ton of time. And you're actually going to be spending time on other things as well.
I think that's a good point, and I would just add, you said making coding easier. I know it's funny sometimes we don't even realize when we answer questions it's from our perspective as whatever hat we're wearing. And I think that's the last kind of, really tie to legal that I'd add is really any industry, as we talk about, regardless of the industry, we think it's good, this new thing is going to make this much easier and more efficient. And to your point, there's still a lot to be done to make sure both that we, have found the right uses for us and for our industry, and that we're getting, the best possible results, but also knowing where, to keep a human in the loop, to keep an expert in the loop, and where this is a great first draft that this, product has given me. Now it's my job, it is my duty to, review it and correct it and make sure that, I get it over the finish line.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, just another place, kind of that human in the loop. I think we need to start thinking about agents in the loop, and make it a little bit more agent centric, just to be provocative. But I do think, again, on this idea of we're going to be spending time in different places. If it's becoming easier to disrupt workflows, we're going to actually be spending a whole lot more time on workflow redesign and adoption and change management. So all those like human-centric activities are going to be necessary because it's becoming a whole lot easier to disrupt workflows, make them more efficient, et cetera. So that's just another kind of bucket of time where as you kind of scale back in one, you're going to be scaling up in the other. And I think what's interesting, it's the important thing to talk about. It's kind of like if you think about it as kind of a one-time versus recurring cost. These are one-time costs. We're talking about the testing, the workflow redesigns. Those are one-time costs. You are saving time overall, kind of in that process efficiency. But there is this one-time kind of cost that you're going to have to pay.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because rather than taking all this talk about AI coming for our jobs and what have you, what you're saying, how it makes sense to me anyways, how it speaks to me is we're actually just reversing the cycle that we thought it would be okay, we're going to do this work and use AI to make it better. Sometimes now it might even be starting with the AI work product and making that better, and you almost get into this cycle of, right, it's making us better. The goal is to make us better rather than replace, by switching that kind of order or adding it into the cycle in different ways. But always, like you said, remembering the role of, the human, the expert, the, what have you in getting it there.
I've got another kind of fun AI trend that I'm seeing that I think pertains, really well to legal. And that's really about the application of, AI agents in sales and marketing material. And so, what I'd like to do is tell a little story first.
Okay, I love when you tell a little story.
Let's tell a little story and then, really bring it back to legal and how I think this is relevant for legal and how, kind of marketing and BD should be thinking about, the application of agents. So, if we go, way back in time, when email first came out, people started.
When you were what, like 20 at that point?
Yeah, I was probably 40. Yeah, I was probably 40 at that. When email first came out, you had, the creation of spam happened, right?
Ooh.
And initially spam was super effective because, hey, it's an email. I don't have that many emails. I don't have that many contacts. But what people started to do was realize, well, maybe I'll just click on an email that makes sense to me, right? Like, oh, Christina sent me an email. I'm going to click on Christina. Bob sent me an email. I don't know any Bobs. I'm not going to click on that email. And we see the same thing with our phones, right? We tend to pick up phone calls from people we know, and we ignore those that we don't. So we have this kind of spam filter plugged into our mind already of who are we going to spend our time with? Who are we going to pay attention to? And I think what we're seeing a little bit of that in the AI and the agent space as well, where, a few years ago, we developed a highly automated, what is essentially an agent before agents exist, using LLMs and vector databases to reach out to.
Morgan said vector database. Everybody take a shot.
Yeah. So, we developed the system and it was fully automated. And we thought it was giving great job recommendations. So it was a fully automated job recommendation. Hey, here's a job, here's a great candidate. Let's, invite that person to apply. And we knew that we were giving great recommendations. What we assumed was we were going to give great recommendations and no one would engage with it. We just made that assumption. Why, we'll figure that problem out next, right? Let's first get the recommendation engine going, and then we'll figure out the engagement problem. Well, what happened was we got it out there and we ended up getting like 80% open rates on one-off emails across the board. Didn't matter the role, didn't matter, kind of the company, et cetera. We were just getting great engagement. And come to discover, we put in kind of a business rule just to make sure that it was a relevant, kind of thing where we put in some business rules to make sure that, the person was engaged with the brand they were being asked to apply. And so it's the same idea of there's an existing relationship between the agent and the automation and the person you're reaching out to. And I think what a lot of organizations are missing, and this is how it comes back to legal, I think what a lot of organizations are missing is you can't just put a bot, right, and an agent and just start spamming, business development ideas and sales ideas. There needs to be an existing relationship, an existing connection. You first have to do that before these bots are going to be truly effective. And so if I'm sitting in legal right now, and I'm sitting in business development or marketing, how do I get more physical connection with my highest priority prospects that can then allow me to really bullhorn the impact and the value of highly tailored, personalized agents? But you need that existing relationship. And so it's not we're going to move completely to bots, back to this human idea. I don't think we can move completely to bots. It's a combination of how do we continue to do really great in-person relationship building, and then we use bots to actually make that more effective, and really kind of move things forward. I think that's a really interesting and kind of emerging trend for legal.
Okay, I've got two first, just like kind of a reaction, and then I think I've got another. I'd like to think through another connection to legal there. The first is that it makes me think of, on my iPhone, there's a setting, and you go into your phone settings and you literally just click silence unknown callers, right? It's kind of that. It's like putting on a spam filter. If I don't have, like you said, if I don't have an existing relationship to the sender, the content, the whatever it is, I'm not even, it's not going to make it to my inbox. Never mind, I'm not going to read it, even if it does, right? I'm like, nope, next, like moving on. So that's number one. The second thing that you said that really spoke to me was kind of your experience in your past with, that HR kind of, that recruiting type example that you gave. What really spoke to me is, finding the right voice and messaging for the audience you're trying to reach. And it makes me think of today, this trend of, I've seen a lot in like legal blogs recently about basically, feeding every opinion that a judge has ever written into, and saying, okay, now here's my brief, rewrite it in the voice of this judge. And to the point, right? It's a very different context, but it's the same idea of like, how do I best voice this message in a way that it is going to speak to its intended audience, no matter what the message is or who the audience is. I think carries across a lot of broad applications, but that's what I'm thinking about. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, I think it's an interesting question. So are people gaming the system? Are they using technology to game the system, right? Am I using a piece of technology to give me an unfair, it's almost an ethical question. Does this piece of technology give me an unfair advantage when, kind of presenting to a specific judge, right? Because I can understand every ruling, every judgment they've ever had and understand what they like, what they don't like, and basically incorporate that. I think the thing that I've seen in the past is when we're first thinking about these things in the concept of AI and automation, we think they're novel problems and they're new problems. But here, I'll throw it back to you.
I love this because I'm ready.
As an attorney, I mean, would you already be trying to do this? Are you already trying to write your, are you trying to position the case to what you already know about that judge? And so if you had more time, more money, larger law firm, are you already doing this? And you have almost at some level an unfair advantage because you have all these massive resources. Like, aren't we already doing this just with time and money?
Sure. So a few things I'll say. When I started in private practice, it was, small law firms, but really high volume and high kind of stakes, really like complex federal, massive nationwide litigation. And even with, I had no paralegal, I had no, associates under me, and I was doing literally the old school, like manual case law research. And I really prided myself. Like, I write a really good brief. I'm really good at legal research. And I even then would, when I do my Lexis search or my Westlaw search, I'd then, if I got it really good, really tailored to like the types of case law I was looking for, I'd go into the filters and I'd see if there were any judges first in that circuit or district, then try to narrow it. And if there, and God forbid, I found an opinion written by that judge, I'm going to cite it. I'm going to say that judge's words to them. And I've heard someone said something like, if you don't have precedent, like you lose, right? But here's the thing, and this is where I want to go with this. I really love that you asked me this question because, yeah, but also no, right? Like, if I'm an associate and a partner tells me, here is the argument we are going to make, go write me this brief, go find me the research. And I do the research and I come back and my memo is like, no one has ever ruled on this before. There's no precedent. We lose. I'm either getting fired. I'm not ever going to do work for that partner ever again. Like, my billables are zero, right? Because that's what precedent is, right? And I'm not to get political on jurisprudence and like the Supreme Court and whatever, but seriously, right? Like, all any of us are doing is taking something that's been done before and trying to argue that it supports our point of view. And so, to your point about gaming the system and what about if everybody's got this advantage, I think it becomes kind of a really cool, again, to the point, if everyone's doing that, if that becomes the new model, we have to adapt. We have to come up the food chain and become better at, if I know that my opposition is going to do that and feed every, opinion that the judge has ever written and ask that AI to write the brief or the mock order, whatever proposed order in the voice of that judge, giving the answer, the outcome that they want. I can do the same thing, and I want that same exact body of work to prove the opposite. And so I think that almost does it, forces you to come up the food chain and say, and like, again, not to like, toot my own horn, but like, that's what I had to do manually. That's what I'm like the like grandpa, like, oh, I had to walk up the hill in the snow 3 miles to get to work. But like, I had to do that manually and literally try to make the same cases say the opposite. So I think it's kind of a cool, I don't know that it's good for, legal research or for young lawyers to learn the law, but I do think that at a high and complex level, if I'm really good at what I do, if I understand the basics, if I have the outline, I think it's a really cool way to elevate kind of that counter argument. And maybe you speak, maybe you do get a better outcome because you've convinced the judge that what they said does apply to what you're saying, even if they reached a different outcome.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, we're talking about, kind of the trends and, we touched on a couple things in that, right? Data access, having access is important, right? The LLM needs to have access to information. But I think the other thing that you touched on is, look, it's not just that we're seeing parity in LLMs, we're actually going to start seeing almost parity in our ability to, form arguments if we all have access to the same information. Right. And I think, again, you might see people trying to frame this as an ethical question, but we're already doing it, right? It's just that it's not a level playing field. If you've got more time and more money, you're able to do a better job. And so, where have we seen, access to LLMs elevate law? It's not in the exceptional it's kind of, below the exceptional. The exceptional, they've got the time and the money and the resources to do this with just hours, right? Where we're going to, see is, to your point, the ability to elevate everyone else because they don't have to spend massive amounts of time. They're going to have access to tools that can do this work for them, which allows them then, to your point, have to be a little bit more novel.
Frees up your strategic, your analysis. It frees you up to make those more strategic kind of moves and think at a really higher elevated level, which I love. Yeah. It looks like I've like completely lost track of time. I don't even know when we started. I think we're probably getting pretty close to time up here. Do you have any parting thoughts before we leave today?
No, I think we touched on a couple of really important things for legal, right? The first is, I think, while agents are really interesting and automation is only going to happen more, in professional services like ours, those relationships become more important. Your relationships almost become your moat, right? If you want to think about it that way, because relationships are going to give you access to the ability to have meaningful tools, meaningful automation from a business development perspective. I think that's pretty interesting. And then, as far as like current events go, we're just going to see more LLMs. Don't focus on the most recent LLM. Focus on how do you replace that LLM? How do you, give consistent and, consistent results and good results, I think is important. And then data access, again, less about the LLM. How are you architecting a system to be able to share information with an LLM, to be able to share information across different tools in your organization, different people in your organization, so that you can really fully use that LLM. Maybe that LLM sits within, kind of the four walls of your, your firm. Maybe it sits, kind of in a very secure cloud. There's a lot of different ways to architect the security of LLMs, but how are you providing the ability to share information within your organization, I think is absolutely key.
It's been a pleasure as always. Like I always say, as we wrap up our conversations, I mean, doing deliverable work all day, every day, like any of us, whatever, it gets tiring, but it's so refreshing. And it's such a, a really nice break in my day to just spend, whatever, 15, 30, however many minutes noodling on really exciting and interesting stuff going on in the world. So as always, I appreciate you being here with me. And we'll be back next time. I think we spoiled or teased last time that we'd be talking about risk versus reward in innovation. I'm glad we were able to take this, quick time to tackle something that's actually super relevant and current. So next time we'll come back with our risk versus reward discussion. And I really look forward to having that conversation with you.
I think risk versus reward is going to be like, sorry, we didn't have time for Matt Damon today. I can almost see us like having another one before that. But yeah, sorry, risk versus reward.
Yes.
We'll have you on next
Sorry,
time.
Mom. That's the thing. Your mom was so excited for risk versus reward. We're just going to keep teasing her, just like keep pushing it farther out. She'll be so excited by the time we finally get there.
Yeah, I will close out with an I love you, Mom. But yeah, thank you everyone for, kind of listening and, really appreciate all the support and the really valuable feedback and comments that we've got. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.